This Zoom session will be recorded. So if you do not want to be recorded, please leave your cameras off, which is if you're on a desktop, it will be in the bottom left corner and says stop camera. And also please keep your mics muted throughout the entire session. Now, introducing Bart, who is a wildlife biologist with a track and sign level 3 certification. Bart holds a degree in physics and coastline watershed science and policy. His master thesis on the distribution of carnivores on the former Fort Ord was published in 2015 in the Journal of Mammalogy. He's a co-facilitator of the Bay Area Tracking Club. When he's not tracking, he's enjoying sharing stories that inspire people to connect with nature. Now, without further ado, I will hand the session over to Bart.
Thank you, Ganesh. Thank you for your help. Thank you, Namita. And thanks to the Monterey Peninsula Regional Park District and Carmel River Watershed Conservancy for hosting this awesome event. I am excited to have you all here, and thanks for joining us this afternoon. And today I'm going to be talking to you about how to start learning tracking with iNaturalist. I'm a wildlife biologist. I spend a lot of time outside, and one of the ways that I interact with nature is through tracking. And tracking for me is being in a mystery that starts with a single question. And if I am open and curious and adventurous, that can quickly turn into a whole cascading waterfall of questions that leads me down the path of greater discovery and more mysteries. So starting with a simple question of who walked here, you can take it down to what foot is this track from? Is this a front foot? Is this the hind foot? Is this a left or right? That leads you to a question of how this animal was moving. Then you can start asking question of where was it going and where was it coming from? Was it using cover? Was it out in the open? Easy questions to when the animal was walking through. So you kind of have to get a sense of the weather patterns that were happening in that time period. And then you can ask wider questions even than that of, why this animal is here? What is its strategy for survival? And ties it into the greater ecology. So it's a process of zooming in into the really fine details, from smallest tiny little pricks of claw marks on a track to a wide scale landscape types of questions. And today I'm going to show you how to get started using a really awesome tool, which is iNaturalist. And I'm just going to start sharing my screen now. And a lot of you probably have heard of iNaturalist, but you haven't. I encourage you to check it out. It's essentially a social network that's centered around people's discovery of nature. So people can share their observations through recordings of photographs of things they saw. They can also identify. And that combination of identification and submitting of images is what's making iNaturalist so powerful for learning and discovering things that you didn't know existed. Now, word of caution, it is a social network, so it can suck your time quite a bit. You can spend countless hours of looking at things didn't know existed. So I recommend you set some parameters, some boundaries around that, but it can be a very useful tool. So right here is just my profile page. This is my username, gulo_gulo. So if you ever have questions on tracks, something you see in nature, you can send me a message through iNaturalist, or you can actually just comment down below images. I'll show you how to do that later. Here I am just following some people that are friends of mine or other naturalists, and that's essentially my community of trackers that I follow and learn from and share my observations with. Now, when you're starting tracking, it's a really good idea to know what animals are there present in the region that you are tracking. So I'm going to go to this Explore tab right here, and it automatically will take me to our area of Monterey Bay. So let me just click on the map. And as you can see, there's all these submissions here. If we zoom in a little bit, you'll notice that there are all these different colors, pinpoints. The blue ones stand for the animals, the green ones stand for plants, the pink and orange ones are for invertebrates and fungi and all sorts of other life forms. But today I am just interested in looking for mammals. So I'm going to go to the filter tab here, click on the mouse icon here, and I'm going to update search. And right here it's showing me we have 92 species within this region, which is a lot of species. We are in a biodiversity hotspot, but if you take a quick look at the grid of the species that we have, here's your species list. So aside from lots of animals that we have out in the bay, and not surprisingly, lots of observations of sea otters and humpback whales, that's often what people come to Monterey Bay for, to go on a boat and see all these amazing wildlife we have out on the bay. Out on our parks and on the land, we have all these different animals, and it's really useful to know what are your friends, what are your neighbors that are sharing this landscape with you. Let's say you were going to a new area, maybe let's say you're going to Yosemite National Park. You can do this search instead of Monterey Bay. You can search for what animals are present in Yosemite, and it will give you a list of species that you're likely to see, or maybe you'll see their tracks. So let's move on now to how do you go about learning tracking? And so in the search box right here, I'll just type in animal tracks. And the first thing that should pop up is the North American Animal Tracks database. I'll click on that. And again, my Monterey Bay area region is sort of there by default. I'm just going to click out of that. And right here, we're seeing we have over 47,000 observations of different tracks and other animal sign, and over 1,000 species, 1,200 species almost. And so let's say you're curious about bobcats and what bobcat tracks look like. I'm just going to type into the box here, bobcat. Select bobcat, and then I'm going to, in the filter box, just do one more filter here. I'm just going to type in track. So I want to just look for tracks, and I don't want to look for other things that bobcats may be doing. So I'll just click something on accident for a second. So here is an example of bobcat tracks and snow. I just want to go out of that for a second and show you how powerful this tool is, because now you have 274 observations of bobcat tracks all across the United States. And so you can see tracks in all different substrates, in the sand, in the mud, in the snow, and from all different regions, from all different animals. And this is very powerful. If you were to just look at pictures in your field guide, which I still encourage you to get, but you'll have like 2, 3, maybe 4 pictures of bobcat tracks. Here you have 274 observations. Some of these observations have more than one image associated with them. And so this is an amazing tool for discovering tracks right out of the comfort of your own home. You don't have to put on shoes or jacket and get out. You can do it all from your Zoom or from your desktop. Now, I do want to mention that iNaturalist has this desktop application, which I'm using right now, but also has an application for your phone. And they sort of do two same things, but they are designed for different purposes. So the app on your phone is more designed to be used out in the field and collect information, collect images, observations that it's very easy to submit. And the desktop application allows you to do much more detailed searches and queries, and it's much easier to utilize it for that purpose. So instead of me going through all these pictures and select one, I already had some marked before in my favorites box. And so I'm going to just show you examples of different animal tracks and tell you how to identify. What are some characteristics you can start learning to identify tracks that you may find out on your adventures. So let's see here. I'm trying to minimize this. Hold on. Ganesh, is there a way of getting rid of this ribbon up on top? Because I can't get to my other tab with it.
Say that one more time.
The ribbon up on top for the zoom, can I minimize it some ways? Otherwise.
If you go to view options, I think it should give you hide video panel. If not, I think it's kind of like stuck there at that point. You would have to stop sharing, then reshare your screen.
All right, let's see really quick if I can get rid of it. All right, well, we're going to do it differently. We're going to go from here. So in my favorites, I have a bunch of images that I had already selected prior. And so I'm going to show you some of these images and tell you what makes them what they are. So let's click on this image of a bobcat track. So what makes this track a bobcat track and not, let's say, a mountain lion or a coyote or a fox? And there's several different things that you should start focusing your eyes on that will help you identify. First of all, notice that there's a scale in the picture, so that's very useful because it gives you immediate idea of the size of the track and the size of an animal. So these tracks are roughly 1.5 inches, maybe slightly larger. So that gives you a sense of how large the animal is that has a paw size of 1.5 inches. And we're definitely not talking about a very large animal here. This is not a mountain lion track. But it's within the range of a bobcat. It's within the range of a mountain of a coyote. So why is it a bobcat and not a coyote, for example? The first thing I'm noticing about it is that it's fairly round shape. So this track over here is rounder than this one, that they both have kind of round shape. And another thing I'm noticing is that it has 4 toes. So that's very key. Counting the number of toes on the track is very important to help you identify it down to a species level. Now, cats and dogs do have that toe high up on their leg. That's toe number 1, but it's hardly ever registers. So when you're looking at tracks, you're almost always going to see 4 toes on the front track. And I'm noticing that this heel pad is really large compared to the entire track. There's very little negative space between the toes and the heel pad. So this area right here is very small. I'm also noticing that this track is somewhat asymmetrical. What I mean by that, if I was to draw a line right down the middle of the track, then this toes leading, sticking out in front of this one, it's kind of like our own hands actually. If you were to take out your left hand and palm down and look at it and tuck your thumb in, this toe right here corresponds to your middle finger. And you can see on your hand, your middle finger sticks out. And then there's a little bit of a curve to the toes 4 and 5. So that is actually a great indication of which side of animal you're looking at. This is a left side, and this is a left front track because we know for feline animals and for canine, the front tracks are generally larger than the hinds. Another thing that makes it a front track is a large heel pad right here. But both of them show this trapezoidal shape of the heel pad. Technically, it's called the metacarpal pad. Sometimes people refer to it as palm pad, but generally, sometimes people say it's a heel pad, although technically it's really not a heel. And then also notice that there is no clear marks from claw marks. So round shape, 4 toes, large heel pad, asymmetry, lack of claw marks. These are all feline characteristics. And now, because we already have our species list that we've done before, we know that our wild felid friends here in the area are bobcats and mountain lions, and this is just too small of an animal to be a mountain lion. So this has to be a bobcat. You can look at another image that's submitted with this observation. Here is something you see very frequently, actually. It's when the animal steps into its own track. So this was the front track right here, and then it stepped with its hind foot on top of it. So you don't really see the entire front foot, but you see the entire hind foot. So let's click out of that and look at another example of a bobcat track, a different bobcat track. So these also beautiful tracks. And you can zoom in on them. And again, I'm noticing sort of round shape, a little less asymmetry than in the previous tracks, but it's still there. This is the leading toe right here. Large trapezoidal heel pad, little negative space. Again, the size is roughly 1.5 1.75 inches. This is likely the front track, and this is the hind track based on the size of that heel pad. It's larger in this track than in this one. And again, absence of claw marks. This is also a bobcat track. And what makes this cool now is that you can scroll down and see what all the other people have submitted, and everybody seems like they have agreed that this is a bobcat track, and I already have done so as well. But here's a space where you could, for example, write questions if you were not sure. If you had specific questions to someone, you could just, let's say, write at, and if you were to ask your friend, I'm just gonna say Garth Harwood, he's my tracking friend. I'm just gonna say, take a look at those. And Garth, next time he logs in, he's gonna see it in his notification here, and you can start a conversation that way. A few other examples of, I'm sorry, this is the page I'm looking for. A few other examples I want to show you. Let's move from our bobcats to a mountain lion and compare the tracks of those animals. So again, what I'm noticing here are round tracks with large heel pad. You can see this beautiful 3 lobes on the bottom edge of this pad, and double lobe up front. And you can see this large heel pad here. This is likely a front track. 4 toes, lack of claw marks. Again, there's that asymmetry that I was talking about earlier. These are definitely feline tracks, but look at the size of them. These are almost 3 inches wide. Well, maybe not as wide, but close to over 2 inches. And they're over 2 inches long. So these are large animal. These tracks came from a large animal. This is definitely a mountain lion track. And so if I scroll down here, this is a good example of how people can start interacting with one another using iNaturalist. And in this particular post, people are wondering whether these are from a male mountain lion or a female. And so I'm not going to go through the whole discussion here, but you can see that how many people have interacted. And it's a great tool to ask questions and comment and exchange your observations with your fellow naturalists. So I want to show you now different animal tracks from different family. let's take a quick look at a member of the canine family, our wily coyote friend. So a few things you may notice right away. Also 4 toes, and also there's a heel pad, but notice the general shape of these tracks. Much more oval. The tracks are much longer than they are wide. And these 2 side toes I clearly sort of tucked in behind the front toes. And the heel pad is much smaller compared to the entire track, and that creates this large negative space here in the middle of the track that was not present in the feline tracks we are observing. Notice that you can draw an X through this track between the toes and the heel pad without actually crossing either the heel pad or the toes. And so that's another indication. The tracks themselves are pretty symmetric. So if I was to draw an imaginary line right in the middle, and then kind of imagine folding the track on itself, the one side is almost identical to the other side. And obviously also notice the claw marks that are present on this track. If I notice them, those claw marks are actually kind of large for a coyote, but all the other characteristics make it a canine track and a really nice, beautiful coyote tracks. And notice someone put a penny just for scale. So if you don't have a ruler, putting something for scale is very useful to give you an idea of how large these tracks are. We can just see what other tracks are in the pictures. So it looks like these were the pictures that were submitted in the first photo, and here are some other tracks that were associated with it. All right, so let me take a quick look at one more set of tracks, and then I want to show you quickly how to submit your images and what to do in order to have better chance of people replying and commenting on them. So let's go to one more set of tracks if it will let me. All right. So let's take a look at these gray fox tracks. So notice how small these tracks are. This is what this penny is used for. These are just maybe 1.5 inches the most. This is the hind track, and the way I know this is because it's smaller than the track underneath it, and this track landed on top of this one. So this was from the hind leg versus this is likely from the front. And notice the tiny little pinpricks for the claw marks. These would not typically be from something like a domestic dog. Notice how these outside toes are nicely tucked in behind the leading toes. The overall shape of the track is oval. It's symmetric again. And the heel pad and the hind track is very small compared to the entire track itself. So all these characteristics, this is just a different view of the same track, make it a canine track. And because of all these fine details, tiny little claw marks, the way that these tracks are so tight, make these gray fox tracks. So here I could say, you can see all the other people submitting, agreeing that this was a gray fox, and I'm going to do the same. So for the last remaining few minutes, I just want to show you really quick what you would do if you wanted to submit your own images. Now again, if you're using an app on your phone, that process is very simple, and there's guidelines on the iNaturalist how to do that, but it's pretty straightforward. If you're doing it from the desktop, you would just click on the upload file, choose files, navigate down to your folder and select an image. You can select several, just one. I'm going to do one for making it faster. And this is a track that I took in 2018, but I know exactly where I was because this was during a tracker evaluation. This was on Pescadero State Beach. And so it's going to take me there. I'm just gonna narrow this really quickly, the general area where I observed the tracks. And now when I click the species name, you're going to get some suggestions. And so the first thing that it's showing me here is the mountain lion, then Virginia opossum, and then all the other animals. Now, I know that these are from a bobcat track, and I could select that, but assume that, for example, you weren't quite sure what these tracks were, and you wanted to get people's help with identification. You could just type in mammals and click on that. And then, or if you know that these are feline tracks, but maybe you're not sure if they're bobcat, you could type in felines. And so you can go up into the family tree to the level that you feel comfortable with. And few things that you can do to just make it more likely to be seen by other people is you can add tags. So I'm gonna just type in track, not yuktak, track. And then very important, I'm going to add it to the North American Animal Database. And then anyone who's following that project, I guess it's already selected, is going to be able to see it and then be able to comment on it. So I'm just going to submit, and that's it. It should go right into the observations, and when you refresh this page, it should show up there. So with that, I just wanted to now stop sharing and take any questions that folks may have.
Looks like we had a question earlier in the chat from David Bush. Do you and or your associates give tracking tours for both adults and children? And the other question was, do you ever do plasters of the tracks for keepsakes?
Yeah, excellent question. So regarding the tracking tours, I help facilitate the Bay Area Tracking Club, which before the pandemic would meet once a month, generally north of Santa Cruz area. And we would essentially do what we just did, but in real life with real tracks on the beach, in the sand. Sometimes we'd venture to other locations as well. I also run the Monterey Bay Tracking Club, but again, it's kind of on hold during this pandemic period. So hopefully we'll be getting out in the field soon. But you can do a search for Bay Area Tracking Club on our Facebook page, or you can email batc@groups.io, and I'll type those in later into the chat box. And we're doing Zoom meetings right now for the period of the pandemic while we can't meet. And the second question was about plaster casts. Yes, I do use plaster to make plaster casts, and they're very helpful for learning, and they're just cool things to have around if you find a beautiful set of tracks that you can plaster. Definitely.
If there are any more questions, please feel free to unmute your mic and speak up, or put them in the chat.
I just wanted to say to you, Bart, that thank you for that information, and I will follow up with what you send. But it's always great. You know, I know I even have a plaster cast that I did when I was a Boy Scout a couple of years ago, and I kept it, you know, and I just know it's rewarding and memory seeking for children. So it's a fun thing to do. I'm glad you're doing it.
Yeah, definitely. It's really fun to have something tactile to remember your experience of tracking, and then it's a great teaching tool. Absolutely. So in the chat box, I just submitted the link to our Facebook group. If you don't use Facebook, you can email batc@groups.io. All right, well, I thank you all for joining me, and hope that you got a sense of how powerful an iNaturalist can be for learning identification of new skills like tracks. And I hope that it encourages you to get out there and start submitting your own images. And again, you can hit me up on iNaturalist. I am Gulo_Gulo. If you have tracking questions, feel free to send me a message. And hosting this, and thanks to all the other presenters. I watched Melinda's Nakagawa's presentation before this, and it was amazing. So if you didn't get a chance to see some of the presentations live, I encourage you to then review them when the recordings are available, because there's such a plethora of awesome information and skills that are being offered through this event. So thanks again, and maybe I'll see you out on the trail.